So Andrew is going to talk to us about overcoming cyber performance anxiety. And I hope there's going to be no jokes, maybe. We can't make that promise. Okay. Andrew is an information security professional with 15 years experience building and delivering security and technical outcomes aligned for commercial, military, and government sectors. And he's currently the head of cybersecurity at Shelde. So thank you very much, Andrew, and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Look, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me along. Hey guys, thanks for having me along. Let me just go and grab my slides. Go and share some screens. All right. Share that one. Press present. All right. So look, thanks so much for having me along today. So I saw Adam's tool shirt before as another avid tool fan. I thought I had to run upstairs and get my tool hoodie. So get that on. But look, thanks in terms of the ComfyCon organisers. Thanks so much for putting this on. There's obviously a hell of a lot going on in the world at the moment, and these types of events are just so incredibly important in terms of bringing the community together and this kind of stuff. So thank you so much for doing this, guys. So yeah, had the introduction there. So yep, I'm currently the head of the cybersecurity practice at Shelde. I come from a long practitioner background, and essentially this talk is talking through what I considered when I stepped from being a SOC analyst to an incident responder to engineer to working in all these different areas in the Australian military and that type of stuff, and then technology, that type of stuff. What did I consider when I looked at when it was my time to step up and go into a leadership role? When I owned the operational security capability, or I stepped into the CISO role, what did I consider good to look like, and what were the things that I considered when I built the program out? So this is really just a bit of a talk through that that process and what was going through my mind at that time. And this is cut down from like a 90-minute preso, so I'm going to dive right in because there's lots to get through. So first, I had a couple of questions. I had a couple of things that I had going through my mind when I thought about starting to build the program. How was I going to run it? And these were kind of the two that popped out as being significant for me. And as an observations is looking at not just what I'd inherited, but then also looking at other organizations that I had the privilege of helping their security programs out, third parties, and looking at all these different industries and verticals were attacking what was essentially the same problem, but they're doing it in different ways. And some were effective, some were not effective. And what was I going to roll into my program? But one I looked at was, and I saw this a couple of times, is when you had a cyber board report that was being delivered, so board of directors or audit committees, those types of things, and you looked at what's being presented and said it was awesome. But then you looked at the counter, the juxtaposition, you looked at the pen test and said, well, hang on a sec, how can we be terrible at our pen tests? How can we get, all of these different vulnerabilities getting compromised, all of these different things getting exfiltrated, that kind of stuff? How can we really be confident that we're actually delivering this awesome capability when the reports, the pen test reports say something completely different? And so for me, it was that white space in between there. It's like, well, hang on a sec, why is that? A lot of that then came down to being focused on what good looked like, and the bar was being delivered against was things like, for example, compliance-based reports. We are ISO 27001, NIST 800-53, PCI, whatever. Pick your framework. We are compliant, therefore we are secure. And a lot of the metrics that were being delivered to a board of directors were not necessarily things that they could digest, that they could actually put into a business context and actually get meaningful data out of it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And so then it flipped to, well, how do I actually know? How do I actually know whether my cybersecurity program actually works? And what does working mean in the context of an organization? Each organization that I was lucky enough to work with had different versions of what good looked like and what the outcomes they were trying to achieve were. Some were make sure all of our customer data remains where it needs to be. Some were make sure our products are up and running and they don't have any downtime. There was a whole myriad of different things that kind of played into what an organization wanted to achieve, but it was hard to tease out. So then this question I asked was, well, why would an organization actually even choose to invest in cybersecurity at all? there are some remarkably large numbers that get thrown at some of these organizations. We're talking tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars for a cybersecurity program. But the real question has to be asked is, well, why would you invest that? What are you trying to achieve out of it? What are the outcomes we're trying to drive towards? And often when I asked senior leaders within different organizations, what are you trying to achieve? I don't really know. I got fluffy answers like prevent malware, or I get fluffy answers like, oh, support the business, things like that. It's like, well, we need to be a bit more tangible. We need to actually put some meat on the bones and actually talk about tangible outcomes. Going back to my early days of officer training in the military, it was driven into us from day one. If you are going to plan something, whether it's a mission, whether it's a program of investment, you're procuring something, whatever it is, you need to have a very clear vision of the end state or the outcome you're trying to achieve, because all your requests for resources, dollars, people, whatever it happens to be, is aligned to that outcome, which then makes it that extension, that tying those things together makes it easy to justify the investment because you know what you're trying to get to. And then oftentimes with cyber, we seem to have a really big problem with trying to articulate exactly what we give to an organization. So that was something I took into account as well. So after I asked a couple of questions, I then kind of observed a couple of things just more environmentally in cybersecurity in general, and I thought about some stuff. And so the first thing I kind of looked at was, well, let's be honest. Let's think about where we're actually at in cyber in terms of its maturity right now. Cybersecurity, for my mind, is very much in its infancy. Once again, Air Force background, love my aircraft. And if you look on the top right there, that's the Wright Flyer. So what you've got is, the Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics. They essentially looked at a bird and went, that's pretty kick-ass, I want some of that action, and when decided to go and build something that flew. They had really no idea how to do it. They looked at some university studies, they kind of built some things, they modeled some things, they looked at geometry of birds' wings, that type of stuff, and they said, this is our first pass, this is what we're going to build. And as you can see, it's pretty darn basic. You've got a bit of canvas, you've got some adhesives, you've got timber, you've got pulleys, you've got everything kind of just, it's very basic in its structure. But then the operation of it as well, you can see there is a person right in the middle of it, and they're pulling all the levers. They're doing everything themselves. You fast forward that and then have a look in the last 30, 40 years, and you have a look in the present day to Airbus A380s, 777s, everything like that. They can actually pretty much autonomously fly around the globe with hundreds of passengers, happily eating and sleeping and drinking, probably not happily sometimes, but they're basically autonomous vehicles for the most part. And you look at the progression between where we started with the Wright Flyer, and then we look at where we are with modern aircraft, and then transpose that and think about modern cybersecurity and how we're operating at the moment. We are very much pulling things together by hand. We're getting better with technologies like SAW, we're getting better with technologies like AI and ML, and kind of adding your buzzwords. We're getting better, and there is absolutely a huge amount that we can do with technology to automate this stuff and bring it together. But at the moment, we're still looking for ways to design things or identify opportunities to engineer something and pull it together. In the same way, the Wright brothers flew the Wright Flyer, it crashed, they identified an improvement, they engineered a solution, they integrated it in, they flew it again, crashed, landed, incorporated it. They kept doing this until we got better and better and better. You can see where we are. So for me, I also had to reconcile, we are actually in our infancy. We need to recognize that we don't have all the tools yet. And so what we can achieve for an organization is somewhat limited by that. Another factor was we need to be realistic about what we can and what we should achieve in our programs. So touching on cyber is a high demand, low density capability. This was something that was actually a phrase that I was only introduced to in the last couple of months, but it very much describes a scenario whereby you've got a small amount of people within an organization delivering a large capability that's often required by many different areas. So it might be a GRC risk assessment, it might be monitoring, it might be logging, it might be incident response, it could be anything, but there is usually a small body of people and there's a large demand for it. So, and that very much doesn't even necessarily speak to the skills shortage, it talks to we as InfoSec practitioners are usually a vastly smaller percentage of the organization than even IT or other things. So we are very much under the pump the whole time. We have to be very focused on what we do. We have to be very focused on where we invest, which comes to the next part, which is the flip side to the gigantic behemoth, diabolically large, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment programs. You got the vast majority of organizations have a smaller budget. They're very resource constrained, and you need to be very focused and scalpeled in where you invest that money to get the risk buy down that you need to. The other thing too is what we should achieve. So if you have a look there, I just pulled this off Google last night. Bank robberies. Physical security is not a new thing. We've been having a crack at this for, I don't know, hundreds of years or more, and yet we still have bank robberies. The reason we still have bank robberies is because the FSI spaces realize that for them to operate, they need to have banks open. They need to have branches open, and we've gone to risk management rather than trying to prevent every robbery under the sun. So we've got guards, we've got dogs with laser beams on their foreheads, we've got cameras, we've got anti-jump screens, all that kind of stuff. We've moved large bodies of cash to regional centers. We've minimized and got down to an acceptable level of risk. And this is very much a mindset that thinking about that in a cyber perspective, we need to be getting to as well. We've definitely seen some headspace going that way, but my observation of a lot of programs is we still try to prevent everything. Nothing can get through us as a fortress. And it's just not realistic or scalable. So cybersecurity is a team sport, not a new concept, absolutely nothing new or baffling or amazing about this. But what I did observe, and what I think most people would look at, is articulating from a leadership and program perspective how the team works and how the team comes together to deliver the outcomes we talked about is really, really difficult. There's oftentimes a lot of friction between various different elements of a security program, and then you add in the friction of the other organizations coming in, whether it's audits or people requesting to dive in at the last minute into projects or whatever. There's a lot of friction. Articulating how to come together is really quite hard, and we haven't cracked that nut yet. So all of that together kind of meant that I looked at the program that I was meant to own and deliver against and went, oh, geez, there's a fair bit of headwinds on this one. I have the level of performance anxiety around, can my program deliver what it needs to the organization? So how did I get comfortable? And I guess this is a really important point. This is really the second half of the presentation. There was a model that I've been playing with over time. Once again, you look at it and you actually see it's actually an amalgamation, an adaptation of a lot of different kind of concepts and programs in there. There's some really good elements in there, but it gave me a framework by which I could actually go through and run a program over a extended period of time and be able to articulate clearly the value to the business, articulate clearly the investment required, and then show a progression of maturity in terms of our capability against those scenarios over time. So it's a very simple question I want to answer. If we had a breach today, could we go through and respond effectively to it? Or could we go through and prevent a series of scenarios from occurring to a business? So what I came up with, and there's a bunch of people I'll need to credit over Twitter and LinkedIn, things like that. So this is a concept that I came up with, but has been built and contributed to by some many smart people over a period of time. And so the concept of operations, or the ConOps, was called the Continuous Cyber Maturity Model. And this is a very high level view of that capability. But what we're going to go through next is this model, or this framework for running a program, and how it all fits together. So in the top part, this part of the scenario is very much a paper-based scenario. It's about grabbing from the organization scenarios that are important or meaningful or impactful to an organization. And we'll talk to this in each slide going through, but we take those scenarios, we map them to threat models, we map them to controls, and the output of that whole first piece is what I'm calling the perceived level of risk or perceived level of maturity. So this is very common across most organizations. Is they'll go through and they'll do risk assessments. Most of the time they're paper-based. Very little or very few of them are actively chased after or validated in real time, in real life. You've got pen tests, which are a version or a take on it. What I'm talking about, and this will be the second portion down the bottom here in kind of yellow or whatever that color is, it's taking all of the stuff we perceive to be the case in our organization, that perceived level of maturity. We're going to validate it basically using a purple teaming construct through the capture, analyze, develop, and validate pieces. And then we're going to talk about, well, how do we go through then and fix it, remediate it, and then go through and run it again, and run it again, and run it again. The idea is very much a similar scenario as to military exercise. The reason we go through and do military exercise is you want to see how we operate and integrate, work with all the various different parts of an organization or partners to go through and deliver an outcome. And so going through and doing this way and doing it in production, and I'm going to carry that by it's key that we do this in production as much as possible, really gives you a good sense of where you're sitting. And if we do this well, if we capture all of these pieces well, we should see on the right-hand side here, we've got as capability maturity increases, and keep in mind capability as I define it or as I perceive it here is people, processes, and technology all working together to achieve an outcome. So it's everything working together. You should have a corresponding decrease of risk over time. And keep in mind that as organizations change, threat landscapes change, risk will go back up and then it'll come back down. But it's about managing that and being able to measure it in a consistent way over time that you can then report back and then get better business buy-in. So let's have a look at these. This one is probably one of the most important slides or the most important steps in this whole model. Understanding your organization's critical security scenarios. Really interesting experience I had in the early days of trying out this stuff when I was just getting into the early days of diving into program development, things like that. I sat down with C-level executives at the organization I was working at to tease out what was important or meaningful to them. So this is all an interview process, and there's a bunch of different techniques we can quickly touch on, but in essence, it's going through and asking the C-level executives or the people that drive the business at a senior level, what is important to you? So I actually went into this particular C-level executive, so I was the CFO of the organization at the time, and I sat down and kind of turned around and put it back on him and said, what's important to you? What do you want your cybersecurity team to program to deliver to you? To which I got this sideways kind of look and the squinty eyes, and it was isn't that what I pay you to do? And that's where I had that light globe moment that I couldn't just walk in and put it straight back on them. I need to actually think about how I could develop techniques for going and teasing those scenarios out. And so that then became a scenario of, well, how do we get meaningful answers? How do we have a conversation between the business and the security program to help them understand what's important from a security perspective and us to understand what's important from a business perspective? Interestingly, from that organization, I interviewed the CFO, the CEO, Chief Operating Officer, the Chief of Staff, the CEO, all of the Chief of Engineering, Chief of Legal, things like that. 33-ish% of it was common. It was make sure that you maintain the brand and our brand and reputation of the business. We need to be able to execute in the market. So that was kind of it. That seems fairly generic. What was interesting is in each one of those little areas that they were responsible for, we started to get some nuggets and some gems out of it. The legal officer cared about contracts. The chief financial officer cared, and this is interesting to me, the linear revenue recognition. Linear revenue recognition as growth to report back to the market, so the stock price was maintained. He also cared about the ERP system. The engineering team cared about intellectual property. Marketing cared about the website. There's little nuanced pieces that went into what they wanted to achieve. But that was really important because we collated all of that stuff and put it into what we defined as the critical security scenarios for that organization. And they're all different for each organization. For that organization, it was 10. For another organization worked for, it was 3. For another one we did consulting work for, it was 4 and 7, 8. It's all different. It all really comes down to what they care about and how that business operates. But once you've captured those, you can stack rank them and go after them methodically one by one. And you have this wonderful narrative now that you can have with the business around, well, this is important to you. You told me that you don't want this to happen. So here's what we need to do to validate whether that's going to happen or not. So the critical security scenarios we map against threat models. So in this particular one, this is actually Equifax. So imagine if Equifax actually said that a critical security scenario they want to prevent was a large-scale public data breach resulting in catastrophic impact to brand, reputation, revenue. I got the catastrophic with the star because at the end of the day, they need to be able to go through and define what catastrophic is. But imagine, for example, and interestingly for Equifax, this wasn't catastrophic. It didn't send the money. It didn't close the business because it was data theft rather than data destruction. But imagine they actually had a scenario where all of the databases and all of the backups were burned to the ground. They were gone. Their business model is fundamentally undermined. They couldn't actually do credit reference checks. So the outcome for that organization would be drastically different. But by doing these threat models, it gives us a really, really nice way of them going through and aligning the business outcome to a threat model and then to controls. So you can see here, this is the Equifax attack model. If you actually had a control mapped against each one of these, you'd be able to get a good idea of what that looks like, which is exactly what we're doing. So in the next step, yeah, we go through and we map those threat models to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Love the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Love it to bits. It's awesome. Big hugs for those guys. But what we could do is actually go through and say, well, for that attack, for that tactic or technique, so scanning for vulnerabilities on web servers, we should be able to pick that up with our WAF or next-gen firewall, reverse proxy, whatever. We should be able to prevent it, or we should be able to detect it. And what we expect to happen is what we map here. And that's what we do, is we go through and take the entire model, we map it to our controls and how we perceive they should actually work. And that's what we do. That is the end of the top section up there. At the end of that, you should have a great idea for each scenario. You've got a number of threat models that go against it, and you should have that mapped to your controls. And that's your perceived level of risk. That's where you're sitting right now on paper. The next bit is all the good stuff. Does it actually work? So the first piece is capture, analyze, prioritize maturity requirements. So this is where you actually get a great opportunity to go through and have a conversation with your stakeholders. And your stakeholders aren't just your SOC manager, your incident response manager, your threat and vulnerability manager. It's all of those people, but it's broader. Go through and ask does your legal team want you to go through and make sure that in the event of a privacy breach that they escalate to the legal team within the SLAs for mandatory breach notification laws, for example? Or do we actually go through and escalate to an incident response at the right time? Do we actually even follow our incident response plan? You'd be surprised how often you're going to find that your incident response plan isn't even followed necessarily by your own team. So there's process that you can put into this. You can say, I want to test this. The technology stuff, we talked about that's fairly obvious. But then you've got the people as well. Do they have the right training? Do they know how to do packet analysis? Do they know how to do log analysis? Do they know how to do binary reverse engineering and malware reverse engineering? It's all of these things that go into delivering an overall capability to mitigate against a scenario. Put all of those in. I will say this though, don't try and boil the ocean. Start small. Start small with something like, for example, it could be putting an ICAR file on a domain controller. Or it could be putting Mimikatz on a domain controller. Don't run it, just put the file there. See if your technology works. You should see a whole bunch of telemetry come out of your endpoint antivirus, your EDR products, all that kind of stuff should be feeding into your SIEM, and you should be able to see that stuff coming through and then see how your people respond, see how your processes work, and whole thing. But don't start with, I'm going to go through for a 2-month campaign. Start small and then go unit test, 24-hour scenario, 48-hour scenario, week-long scenario, month-long scenario, that kind of stuff, the campaigns. When we've got those requirements, what we do is develop something called a MESL, so a master scenario event list. And this is just basically a playbook for how you're going to run the actual test scenario. I'm going to click through some of these things, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to give you screenshots. These are just examples of one MESL. But you've got, you go back one. That's what you want to achieve. Here's what the objectives from the offensive, defensive teams. You could have legal in there. We talked about that. It could have everyone in there. These are all the tactics mappings. These are all the tactics and techniques we're going to test out. And then we've got the expected behaviors from our technologies as well over here. The last bit you got there too is then saying, well, here's now event number 1, event number 2, event number 3. You've also got injects. If something doesn't work, if your technology doesn't work, if Cystolytic NG is down, doesn't send through the log at the right time, you're going to have to white card, you have to inject, you have to keep everything moving. So this is just a playbook. There's a lot of work that goes into these, but the nice thing is you can put it into a folder, you can keep it forever. And the really nice thing is if it's repeatable, then you can measure it. If we can measure it, that then helps you justify the overall investment in program. So repeatable process over time is really good. But start small, get bigger. Hack all the things. So do it. So run it. Do it. Absolutely. I will say this, my preference is to do this in production. You're going to get a whole bunch of people go, yeah, good luck with that. Has been achieved. It took in one organization about 18 months for us to get it done and get it through, but we did achieve it. It took a long time to get the confidence, but that was the approval mechanisms, giving people visibility within the business. When you have confidence, they will let you do amazing things because they know that you're not cowboys. They know that you're just going to go, or cowgirls, and you know you're going to go through and actually do the right thing. Because at the end of the day, you're there to help the organization, not break it or hinder it. So do it in production if you can. Findings management. You're going to find lots of things that are broken. Please don't go and set up a findings management capability before, after you go and run the test. Make sure you go through and do a Jira backlog, a Trello board, an Excel spreadsheet, physical cards. I don't really care how you do it, but make sure you've got a way of capturing all this stuff and then burning it down over time. Two reasons. One, you have to have a measurable way of showing all the work you're doing to improve it. The other thing too is if you don't go and remediate all of these various different vulnerabilities that you found, and you actually have a breach and you get put in front of court, go and ask Equifax, they got actually all of their pen test findings for the last 24 months or so, or 48 months or whatever it was pulled out and put in front of Congress. It then becomes a legal liability. Not only should you be burning this down as a matter of professional, that's just what you do, but then there's also a whole bunch of legal liability if you don't. So please make sure you capture it. Please make sure you're burning it all down. And look, there's just so much stuff to fix. You will find this, everyone knows it's the hamster wheel of pain for security. But the cool thing is when you do it using this model, it's actually kind of fun. And sounds a little sadistic, but I'll get to it in my last couple of slides. So what does maturity look like? And keep in mind, this is a kind of a cut down high level view. There's lots more metrics and things like that that go into this. But you can see this is all just made up stuff. The original matrix, the perceived level of risk or maturity for that against those MITRE attack techniques and tactics and techniques. You got a little bit of yellow or orange, you got a little bit of green. The idea is when you run it and you run these and you get that cyber muscle memory. So when you run these scenarios over and over and over again, your people get better, your technologies improve, your processes get tweaked. You're going to pick things up earlier. You're going to get better. That's the exact intent of why we try to do maturity improvement against scenarios, is that we can measure it. And you can see there's a little bit more green in the second one there. I'll go back. And then the last thing, we're getting back to more green. And as things change, you'll go back to being red. New Metasploit modules come out. You've got all kinds of different things that come out. But you can measure it and improve it over time in a way that's visible to the business. And that's it. That's a whole cycle going from start. Has worked incredibly well in previous organizations I've worked at. And look, just to finish this up, capturing some key themes here. Compliance doesn't equal security, not anything new. People say it all the time, but what I don't hear is the corresponding, well, hang on a sec, if you actually go through and aim for securing an environment, you can do it in a measurable way. Inherently, everything that you need in your compliance program is going to be there because you're going to need identity and access management. You're going to need privilege access management. You're going to need endpoint AV. You're going to need all the things that are in the frameworks anyway to achieve the outcome. So if you can drive towards a security outcome, inherently, you will most likely be compliant, and then everyone wins. Maturity against scenarios, please, it gives you greater relevance and a greater voice in a business. It actually gives you an emotional response from a board of directors where they go, well, hang on, I don't want to lose $5 billion worth of market cap hit, or I don't want a scenario where my business is carved up and sold off in parts. You're getting an emotional response, therefore it's easier to justify investment, and it's a focused investment. You're not going to go and ask for $25 million to go and roll out proxies and DLP and every technology under the sun for everything. You're going to ask, well, this is our scenario. this is the technologies that are actually comprising of that scenario. Let's do those first. It's a focused investment. It's a more reasonable investment, and it gives you a far better risk buy down. The cool things that I really, really like, and this is the fun stuff, and I get into my last minute here, is increased morale and team cohesion. You're not chasing ghosts. Instead of sitting there on the hamster wheel of pain in your sock, you've actually got a real person out there, and they're there to make you better. It's like that sparring partner at the gym. They're there to drive you. They're there to make you better. It actually becomes fun. And that's really the important thing for me, is I don't want to go to work every day and find out that it's just boring and it's just clearing alerts every day. I want to know there's somebody there. I want to test myself and push myself, because otherwise you get complacent. And for me, this actually then drove, had far less cyber performance anxiety. As a leader, as an owner, it was far better for me to look at it this way. Look at your pen tests. I said at the start, I'll say at the end as part of my closing thing here, look at your pen tests. They will tell you whether your program is working or not. Yeah. And last one is, cyber's hard. You guys are all doing an amazing job. Everyone out there is kicking goals and really diving in. It's tough. It's not an easy industry to be in. It's stressful, and a lot of people burn out. Be realistic, focus on your outcomes, and keep kicking ass. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I know there's a lot of people in the chat that are sort of saying, give this man a beer for the security compliance discussion, I think it is. I know that's an argument I've had on a number of occasions, and it's something that comes quite interesting when you deal with, Australian government clients who are working under certain things like the ISM. And so you have that awkward conversation where, yes, you can meet this, but that doesn't make you necessarily secure. It just means you're hitting a checkbox. Not that I don't think that it doesn't make you secure. It's very good advice. But for me, it's always driven by your threat model as well. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me along, guys. Really appreciate being here. Keep it up. Awesome con.
No worries.